In this video, I'm going to be looking at the Kampfpanzer 07PE. This is a new Tier 9 German heavy tank, and it's quite unique because it's the first modern German heavy tank in the game. Before this, there were only the sort of World War II super heavy and heavy tanks in the German nation with the E100, Maus, VK72, VK90, those types of tanks. We haven't had any modern vehicle other than the Kampfpanzer 70, and that doesn't quite have the same kind of NBT-like gun that the Kampfpanzer 07 has. So it's a bit of a unique tank. How you get this is by gambling in mystery crates here, which have just been released. They were meant to release yesterday, but there was some problem and they didn't release. And in these mystery crates, there's a 0.05% chance of dropping it. If you get a mystery box 2, then there's a slightly higher chance of dropping it. I'm not quite sure what it is, but you need to buy 15 mystery crate 1s to get one single mystery crate 2, and then to get a mystery crate 3, which has a 5% chance of dropping the tank, you need 10 mystery crate 2s. So it's a ton of crates you need to buy to just have a chance at getting this tank. And it's absolutely not worth it, even in the biggest crate bundles with discounts. If you really want this tank, sure, try for it, but definitely don't spend a ton of money on this tank. It's not worth it despite how good this tank is. And yeah, it's a good tank. I'll get into its stats now. And if you don't want to hear rambling in the video and talking about the tank, you can just go to my website and find the tank either in the German reviews or on the home page. And then you can check out the stats on your own. But here's its armor. This is against 245 millimeters of armor piercing penetration. That is slightly below average penetration for a tier 9 heavy tank. Um, but it's sort of what you'd have at tier 10 medium. So you can see its turret is fairly strong against standard ammo, and its upper plate is extremely strong. And that upper plate is up to 700 millimeters thick, and nothing in the game will penetrate this. Even a Ho-Ri using calibrated shells using premium AP that can't penetrate the upper plate at all. There's only a small sliver at the very top, and that's just the only area which it can penetrate. But basically, fully impenetrable upper plate. The gun magnet is very similar. It's almost fully impenetrable, though very high penetration, like the Ho-Ri with calibrated and premium AP, will sometimes go through. Other than this, you can see that the lower plate is very weak, and it is only 100 millimeters, meaning that HEP from an RU-251 in the perfect situation could penetrate that lower plate. But just be wary of Hesh as well on the lower plate. Other than that, it's just a normal heavy tank lower plate. It can't be angled much because it's just that weak. There is a lower plate, which is an auto ricochet to any gun that is 120 millimeters in caliber or less. So an IS-2 with 122, sorry, an IS-4 with 122 millimeter gun will overmatch that lower plate. And also, if you switch to heat, you can see uh, that area becomes no longer a red area. Uh, Other than this, you can see the side armor is pretty decent. That is 70 millimeters above the tracks and 75 behind the tracks. This shouldn't be able to side scrape as well as it does. In my experience, it has side scraped quite decently, um, even though 75 millimeters isn't all that thick. But in my experience, it has done it quite well. There's also this little weak point on the back of the hull at the engine deck that's just typical for this kind of era of tank, and that is a weak point when you do side scrape. Other than this, the turret cheeks are strong against standard ammo. However, if enemies have calibrated shells on or have very high penetration standard ammo, they will become weak. And you can see here when you turn the turret, it becomes weak, and that's because it relies on angling. So here you can see switching to heat, which is 300 millimeters of heat penetration. The sides become weak because they weren't too strong to begin with. Um, the lower plate weakness, the lower plate strength, sorry, the auto ricochet bit is now gone. The upper plate still remains completely impenetrable, and that is the case with any ammo type. And the turret cheeks, you can see, are now weak against 300 millimeters of penetration. You can see there's still a slight bit of red, so lower penetration levels will still struggle. For example, tier 8 premium ammo. However, most tier 9 and 10 ammo will just go right through. Um, in terms of weak points on the turret roof, you can see that there's a cupola and these two small round bits under the periscopes. Those are weak points. However, for being weak points, they are fairly strong at roughly 250 millimeters thick. You can see that to be able to reliably penetrate with this tank, you need to use premium ammo. Other than this, you can see its gun depression, armor profile, and that is very strong. Against standard ammo, 254 millimeters on the top here, you can see that there's no weak points. Even the cupola is not a weak point. And then against 340 millimeters of heat in this bottom image, you can see that there's only two very, very small weak points on each side of the gun mantlet. And note, in most situations, you won't be hitting that. This is a very accurate gun, roughly 0.302 dispersion that is shooting at the Kampfpanzer, and it is in very close range, and the Kampfpanzer is not moving. Imagine trying to hit those weak points in a situation in a live battle. It's just not going to happen very often. Next, you can see a TD level penetration. This is 278 millimeters of AP on the top here. You can see that the cupola is slightly penetrable, but still the edges are very strong. And then using 365 millimeters of heat in this bottom image, you can see that now the turret cheeks are penetrable. But again, if the tank was moving up and down, left and right in battle, it would still be a fairly hard shot to make, especially if they are at a further range than in this case. And this gun is 0.344 dispersion, which is a bit more average. So overall, decent armor for the Kampfpanzer. It's nothing too amazing, uh, but because you can actually use gun depression to make the turret strong, it's not bad at all. And in fact, it's very dominant on a ridgeline. The only situation where it kind of falls down is on flat ground, and if enemies know to use premium ammo against the turret. So this tank mounts a 120mm gun, and it does 380 damage on average. Its heat is 320 and HE is 480, and these are both fairly average damage levels for having 380 on standard ammo. This is slightly below average alpha damage because most tanks at this tier have at least 400, but 380 isn't bad at all. 9.5-second reload, that is just average for a tier 9 heavy tank. Most tanks with 400 alpha have between 9.4 and 9.9 seconds of reload time, so this is just average. Its damage is less, but it does mean you can still sort of trade on reload with other tanks, and you don't have a downside of having worse reload than similar vehicles. Its DPM is 2,388. That's not high, especially for 380 alpha, but it's not bad at all. Penetration 250 on standard. That's fine for tier 9. Despite being APCR, it is still just fine for a tier 9 tank. Not bad at all. Heat is 330. That is very good. You really don't need more penetration than this. You can go through basically almost anything. And HE is 65, which is also good. It means you can use this damage on 480 on HE quite a lot. Estimated aim time is very good, and despite its base aim time not actually being that good at almost 2.3 seconds base, the estimated aim time is great at 3 or 2.8 seconds, and that is because because your gun handling is just the best in game of any heavy tank at 0.1, 0.1, 0.12. This is better than a lot of light tanks as well. For example, the Batchation 25T or 25T AP. This has better gun handling than those tanks. Accuracy is also very good, 0.326 or 277 if using refined gun, and gun depression is great, and that's really important. It's really needed to be able to use that turret armor. If this had any less gun depression, its turret wouldn't be nearly as good, and its armor would also be just much less effective. So, overall, this gun is very good. All the stats other than DPM and alpha damage are all very impressive. Penetration is great. HE penetration is good. Aim time is great. Base aim time is mediocre, but it's balanced out by the best gun handling of any heavy tank, period. And its dispersion is also very accurate. Gun depression is great for its armor use. So that sort of unimpressive DPM and alpha damage is balanced out by having all of these other great stats, and it just feels like a very consistent, easy to use gun. Next to the mobility, this tank has a top speed of 42 forwards and 18 in reverse. Both of these are very good, especially the 18 kilometers in reverse. That is something very useful to have on any armored tank, uh, especially when mobility is such a important aspect of its gameplay, like it is in this one. Traverse speed is 32.6 on hard terrain and 29.9 on medium. Uh, this is just fairly average traverse. It's nothing special for a heavy tank, but it's not bad at all. Acceleration rate in game is 15.7, but due to its terrain resistances of 1.1 and 1.2, its actual acceleration is 14.3 and 13.1 on hard and medium terrains, respectively. Both of these are good, and it can allow the tank to very easily reach its top speed on both terrain types, um, just because it has that good acceleration. And the terrain resistances are also very nice. Considering the small difference between 1.1 and 1.2, you don't feel like you lose mobility by going off-road. This tank does have a special equipment piece, which is improved suspension, and that gives you better terrain resistances and traverse speed and effective acceleration. So your traverse speed increases by roughly 5 degrees per second from 32.6 to 37.5, and from 29.9 to 32.2 on medium terrain. The acceleration rate in game stays the same. However, since your terrain resistances have improved, your actual acceleration has also gone up from 14.3 to 17.5 on hard terrain and 13.1 to 15 on medium terrain, and that places it solidly as the fastest accelerating tier 9 heavy tank. And it means you can basically always stay at your 42 kilometer top speed very easily. Um, so yeah, great mobility. Definitely use improved suspension because it's something only this tank has with this level of mobility, and it also plays into the strengths of the vehicle. So next, equipment. On this tank, I'm using a gun rammer because you do not need more penetration. While yes, calibrated shells is a more meta choice, you don't need it on this tank. 330mm premium penetration is perfectly fine to go through basically anything. And this tank also lacks DPM, so you're taking away from its already fairly weak trait of DPM to give it something it doesn't need. So I'm using gun rammer just to help that DPM and keep its reload time competitive at 9.55. Which is on the same level as basically any other tank with 400 alpha, with the exception of a few. Next, improved suspension. Definitely use this because it makes the tank much faster. It plays into the strength of the vehicle, and also it's unique to this tank. Any tank can use improved optics, but not any tank can use improved suspension. Next, engine accelerator is equally as valid as improved control because out of the traverse and acceleration stats, the traverse is definitely less impressive. And even without engine accelerator, you can easily reach your top speed of 42. So both of these are good options. It's just up to you which one you want, really. Enhanced armor is definitely needed on this tank. Don't use improved assembly. 82 hit points is absolutely not worth it, as this isn't a tank which sort of focuses on hit points. It has 2050 base, which is low for a tier 9 heavy, and it is not worth adding more to that to try and balance it out. Its turret armor is something that really needs help because on flat ground, it can be easily penetrated by tanks with enough penetration or just being slightly above you. Enhanced armor will help you to ricochet and bounce from higher penetration level tanks such as AWZ-111-5A, which has 260mm of AP penetration. Enhanced armor definitely helps against a tank like that. It makes really the difference between using AP or using heat to penetrate. So definitely use enhanced armor. It also helps when you're using gun depression, which is just so important for being able to hold positions. Next, gun lane drive. Because this tank doesn't have the best actual base aim time, this is definitely needed. Also, because this tank has 980 meters standard shell velocity, it doesn't need supercharger. Uh, Vertical stabilizer. Despite how this tank's stats seem, in terms of its sort of gun handling being the best in game, refined gun absolutely didn't work for me. I was missing a ton of shots randomly, and the gun just felt so much less consistent when I was using refined gun. So for me, despite thinking refined gun would absolutely be the better choice because of its stats on this tank, I'm using vertical stabilizer because I found refined gun didn't work for me. However, try it yourself with these two and see which one works better for you, because both are really pretty decent choices. Next, in terms of consumables, I wouldn't use any engine power boost because this tank is fast enough as it is, and it caps out at 42 quite easily, and also its modules are fairly weak. Your ammo rack seems to get damaged quite a lot, but that's just my experience. You might have a different experience in this tank. One more thing is that this tank has a legendary camouflage called Mystery, and that is because it is coming in mystery containers, and this is that camouflage. That question mark comes up every time you get a kill with the tank. But next, on to some gameplay, if I can remember which ones are the ones to show. So here's the first battle. It's top tier against tier 8 tanks. Uh, in such a matchup, you can be very dominant because this tank doesn't have sort of weak turret armor. Its turret armor in tier 10 isn't weak either, however, it's much more prone to being penetrated by standard ammo and premium ammo. In tier 8, most premium ammo can't even penetrate you, so you only have to worry about enemy tier 9 tanks. So here you can see I'm accelerating much quicker than this Skoda next to me, and that tank itself doesn't have bad mobility since it has gear oil and fairly decent base stats. But you can see how quickly I'm accelerating even up the slope and getting into this position in the corner. So there you can see the snapshot ability of this tank with this amazing gun handling, though that wasn't too hard of a shot to pull off. But a lot of other heavy tanks going at that kind of speed might have missed because their gun handling just isn't as good as this. And just to put into perspective, some tanks might have 2 times worse gun handling on movement. This one has 0.1, most heavies generally have 0.2. So here you can see I've taken a sort of hull down position against the enemy team, and I've pushed forward to try and stop them from taking the corner. And now the Chrysler decides to push me. Unfortunately, since he has pushed me, I'm no longer hull down, since the position I'm in is just too shallow. So here you'll see, when the lower plate is exposed, it is very easy to damage this tank because that lower plate is very weak. And it's quite wide as well, so the only way to troll enemies is try to get them to be baited into shooting your tracks or that auto ricochet on the lower plate. But there you could see I got ammo rack damage, so that's one of the issues I found in this tank, that it does have some weak ammo rack. Here you can see I'm side scraping against the ISU. Since I'm fairly confident in this tank's side scraping ability, this was one of the most recent games I played in the tank, so I already had a feel for what I could do with its armor. There you could see my ammo rack got damaged again, and now I'm just holding hull down against the T-34. So here you can see, despite basically being a free farm on the enemy team, it's been basically almost 3 minutes and I'm up to 3,500 damage. And that's the thing with this tank, despite having a great gun, great mobility and pretty good armor, its raw DPM doesn't really farm up damage that quickly, because its DPM just isn't too impressive of a trait. So that's something to notice about this game here. Also note the alpha damage rolls that I've been having. Earlier I couldn't kill the Scorpion G because it low rolled down to 320 or something. Here it's about to low roll massively again. 288, that's practically a min roll. The min roll in this tank is 285. Here you can see I'm sort of hull down against the tank, so I bounce another shot. So in that game, you could see I sort of played the tank hull down, and it's one of two sort of playstyles I'd recommend with the tank, is either hull down or as a heavium. While this tank has such good sort of all-round capabilities and stats, it can sort of play almost any role, but I would say the main ones you should go for are being a heavium and being a hull down tank. Just due to those being sort of its strengths. It can hold hull down really well, and it is quite mobile. In that game, 236,000 credits, and that was with a credit booster and also high caliber, and the ace adding some extra credits. So next is this game, another top tier battle. And I want to show this one because it sort of shows the tank just being very dominant and very active in a top tier game. So here you can see I'm a bit of a FPS, not that FPS, ping loss in this battle, so it will lag a bit. But you can still see the game just fine. Here you can see I'm rushing right to the middle because I know this tank can be hull down very well on flat ground against tier 8 tanks, since I don't have to worry about them having enough penetration to go through my turret. But since I don't spot anyone, I decide to push up. And notice how quickly I got to that position, how fast this tank's mobility is. Here I get spotted, and seeing my allies pushing up towards the right, I know that the enemy team is down on the left, and that's why I'm calling for help and not pushing forward. So at this point I'm just really waiting for enemies to be spotted by my team or to shoot me. And now they are spotted. Notice the good gun handling of the tank there, snapping a shot against the 252 quite easily. Since I've spotted the enemies now, I decide I'm the top tier heavy tank. I am actually a very strong tank. I should push forward and sort of deal with those enemies. So I decide to push up very shortly here and use the tank's good mobility and hull down armor against the enemy heavy tanks which are pushing. So while it may not be easy to notice how good this tank's accuracy is based on sort of the gameplay I'm showing, because its aim time isn't all that impressive, but notice how easily it's hitting these shots without having to aim too much. That's something really only this tank and a few others can do in terms of heavy tanks. And it's sort of hard to notice in the battle unless you're consciously looking for it. It's just a very consistent type of gun in terms of hitting shots and being accurate. Here you'll see the Caliban, not knowing what this tank is, shoots Hesh at the upper plate and does absolutely nothing. The Kyler, on the other hand, shoots AP at the lower plate and goes right. So here you can see I'm side-hugging the Kyler since he is taller than me, but he can actually hit my engine deck, he just missed there. Side-hugging can actually work quite well in the Kampfpanzer because its turret roof is relatively thick, but be careful of enemies which use heat or are shooting your cupola. So in this game, basically, it was just the perfect top tier game. Not quite as much farm as the previous game, But you can see the tank using its mobility to get into positions to get around the map, then using its armor to against the lower tier enemies and easily bouncing shots, and then now pushing forward with the great mobility to relocate and deal with the final enemies. So this is what I would say is the sort of heavium playstyle in this tank. I could have played just as a regular heavy because these are lower tier enemies, but I decided not to in this game, and it worked out quite well. You can see playing the tank quite actively like this, you don't block quite as much damage, whereas playing in a hold down position, you will block a bit more damage because you can use that gun depression and the very strong turret, which can get up to around 350mm thick when using your full 8 degrees. But in that game, I did almost 5,800 combined with damage assisted. Got a high caliber and a first class, which both add credits to my credit score of 178,000 credits. There is one final game which I will show, but I have to exit the game to get it, so I will be right back. So this is the final game. It is against tier 10 tanks, and it is on Himmelsdorf. So on this map, there's not really too many places where I can go hull down and use gun depression, especially on the medium side, which I decide to go to because I noticed my Yo is AFK and the TVP says to go to the medium side anyway, so I just decide to go there. In this situation, I would say this is a sort of heavium style of gameplay. Going to the medium flank and spearheading a push is what a heavium tank would do. And this tank does play the heavium style very well because it's quick, it has pretty good armor, especially against medium tanks, and it has decent enough reload to be able to, well, it's got decent enough alpha damage to still be able to damage trade against the lower alpha medium tanks. So this tank does work quite well against mediums. There was just bad RNG, not the fault of the tank really, against the ricochet of the lower plate of the 60 TP. Here you can see I'm using the great reverse speed, something very nice on this tank which I didn't mention enough. Having 18 kilometers just allows you to get out of positions or bad situations like that very easily. If I wanted to, I could reverse all the way back to where my allies are right now and escape the 60 TP which is pushing up. And here I call for my team, but they're busy dealing with the enemies which are outside the train tracks, which I'm not really that aware of at this moment. But here the 60 TP you can see is rushing me. He has 550 hit points more, so I'm a bit worried about taking damage. In that situation, I want to point out what just happened. The 60 TP aimed for a while at my lower plate and then decided to shoot me in the tracks. So from the 60 TP's view, he was sitting roughly here, let's say, and he could see the lower plate of my tank sticking out. However, look at this slope. I was sort of sloped down on that bit, so the 60 TP was shooting down on my lower plate. In that situation, the Kampfpanzer would have been pointed down against the 60 TP, and that would have looked like this. Therefore, my lower plate would have been red, and the 60 TP was sort of struggling to be able to shoot down on that, and then decided to shoot the tracks instead. Also note, in such a situation, it's very specific, but enhanced armor allowed me to bounce that shot. Because if you take off enhanced armor, the lower plate is an overmatch for the 60 TP since it is only 50mm thick. 60 TP having a 152mm gun will always be able to penetrate that lower plate no matter what angle basically. You can see that here. However, using enhanced armor allowed me to bounce that shot due to the effect of it increasing the base thickness. But yeah, that was that situation, very specific, but I wanted to point it out. So here you can see the 9.5 second reload does allow me to actually put in multiple shots into the 60 TP like any other tier 9 heavy would, despite its sort of unimpressive DPM. Here, the 60 TP shoots me right under the train carriage into the lower plate, and then I push forward to kill them. So here you can see I have a bit of tunnel vision and go for the Sheridan when there is a 65, Projekt 65 right in front of me. I push forward and take a sort of side-scraping position, and you can see that the shot bounces. So side-scraping does work in this tank, especially against lower calibers. Here I use the great HE of the tank and max roll for 600 damage, and you definitely should use HE because it does help boost that fairly unimpressive DPM quite a lot. But speaking on the side scraping, I would say be aware of side scraping against tanks with AP and very high caliber, because higher caliber means that they have more normalization going through modules, which are very thin, 20 millimeters on the tracks on this tank, and that means they are easy to penetrate for higher caliber guns. But in that battle, it was a more ordinary battle, nothing too special. But it does show the gameplay against tier 10s and a sort of different playstyle as before, since it was on only flat ground. So 3,400 damage, 1,700 blocked, and I made 99,000 credits with a credit booster installed. Also added 24,000 from getting a first class mastery. So this tank, I hope those replays were good enough to show you. It's a very, very good vehicle. I would say it rivals the Object 752, wherever it is, in terms of how strong it is. And while it's a different type of strong to the 752, since the 752 has its troll armor, very solid turret on all situations, really, since it's flat and thick, and it's got that two-shot autoloader, it doesn't quite have the sort of traits that the Kampfpanzer has, which are just being very versatile and fluid in its gameplay, having basically everything it needs to do well in any given situation. While that is true for the 752, it does it in a different way. And I'd say the Kampfpanzer is as strong as the 752. And this tank, it is very MBT-like, which is basically a modern tank. It's got all three traits: mobility, armor, and gun. Arguably less on the armor, but it still has enough. And you can go hull down and be basically impenetrable. So yeah, extremely good tank. The reason it's probably so rare in mystery crates is probably because it is that good. I'm not sure if it will remain in mystery boxes, since Wargaming didn't really tell us much information about this tank. Um, but yeah, if you do have a chance to get this tank for any other way than gambling, definitely go for it because it is an amazing vehicle. It is so nice to play, it is so consistent, and it is arguably quite unique in Tier 9 and for a German heavy tank in general. But yeah, that's the Projekt Kampfpanzer 07 PE. Thanks for watching.